The high-pitched scream of an angle grinder was the first thing I heard that morning. It's a sound that rips right through you, the sound of metal giving up. I stepped out onto my porch, coffee cup in hand, and saw it. The last of my security cameras, my final eye on the world, was coming down. It hung by a wire for a split second, a sad black teardrop against the gray morning sky, before a worker in a fluorescent vest snipped it free. It fell to the wet grass with a soft, final thud. Standing there on my lawn, arms crossed like a general who just won a battle nobody else was fighting, was Karen, head of our Homeowners Association. She had that tight perm blonde hair and a pantsuit that probably cost more than my first car. She was flanked by the two workers, her hired muscle for the day. One of them, a kid who couldn't have been more than 20, wouldn't meet my eye. He was the one who handed me the official letter. The paper was cold and slick from the morning mist. "Rules are rules, Mark," Karen said, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that only comes from pure, unadulterated power. "The bylaws are very clear. No visible surveillance equipment on the facade. It ruins the aesthetic harmony of the community." Aesthetic harmony. I almost laughed. This neighborhood was a cookie-cutter collection of beige houses. The only thing that ruined the harmony was her smug face. If you're watching Karenology, you probably know this story isn't really about security cameras. It never is. I looked down at the paper, a fine $1,500 for a camera that was smaller than my fist. I clenched my own fist in my pocket, my fingers wrapping around a small, heavy piece of brass. It was my dad's old plumb bob, the one he used to build this very house, stone by stone. He always said it was a symbol of perfect balance, of finding the true vertical no matter how crooked the world around you was. Right then, it was just a piece of metal digging into my palm. The sharp edges were a small, welcome pain. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't argue. I've learned that arguing with people like Karen is like trying to teach a pig to sing. It wastes your time and it annoys the pig. Instead, I just looked her straight in the eye. "You just made a huge mistake, Karen," I said, my voice low and even. "Not a legal one, a personal one." Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where you know a line has been crossed, a line there's no coming back from? If this is already making your blood boil, do me a favor and hit that like button. You're gonna want to see how this ends. For a second, her smile faltered, just a flicker. Then it was back, wider than before. "Is that a threat, Mark?" "It's a fact," I replied. She let out a little huff, a puff of victory. She turned to leave, her two minions trailing behind her. But just before she turned away completely, she did something strange. Her eyes didn't linger on my house, the source of her supposed aesthetic offense. They slid right past it to the stand of ancient towering pine trees on the community plot next door. It was just for a second, a glance so quick you'd miss it if you weren't looking. But I was looking, and I filed it away. I went back inside. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was empty. I'd put up those cameras after my dad passed last year. The house felt too big, too quiet. The cameras were just a comfort. A quiet sentinel watching over the place he'd poured his life into. Now they were gone. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the fine, $1,500. It was a gut punch. I'm a landscape auditor. I don't make a fortune, but I'm good at what I do. I can look at a piece of land and tell you its story, where the water will go when it rains, why the trees are dying, where the foundation will crack in 20 years. I solve problems, but this felt different. This wasn't a problem to be solved. This was a fight. I thought about calling a lawyer, but I knew what that meant. Thousands of dollars I didn't have, just to be drowned in paperwork and legal nonsense while Karen and the board ran circles around me. That's how they win. They exhaust you. They bleed you dry, one billable hour at a time. A wave of helplessness washed over me. You ever feel that? Like you're tied down, watching someone dismantle your life piece by piece, and there's not a single thing you can do about it. It's the worst feeling in the world. I sat there for what felt like an hour, just staring at the piece of paper that represented so much more than a fine. It was a claim of ownership, a declaration that this little kingdom was hers, and I was just living in it on her terms. The rain started again, a soft tapping on the roof. Then I heard another sound, a soft scraping noise from the front door. It wasn't a knock. It was the sound of something being slid underneath. I didn't have to pick it up. I knew what it was, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. I knelt down, my knee cracking in protest, and picked up the papers. It wasn't one sheet, but a whole stack stapled together. The cheap printer ink smelled acrid, still fresh. It was a list of new violations, each one more absurd than the last. $100 because my grass was, and I quote, a quarter inch above the regulated 3-inch maximum. $250 because my mailbox, the same black mailbox that had been there for 20 years, was now deemed an unapproved shade of black. But the real masterpiece was the last one. $500 for an oil stain on my driveway. A dark, ugly smear that I knew, with absolute certainty, had not been there when I went to bed last night. Someone had put it there. This wasn't about aesthetics anymore. This was warfare. The total at the bottom of the page was now a neat, terrifying $2,350. They weren't just trying to make me comply. They were trying to break me, to bury me in paper until I couldn't breathe. That night, the Homeowners Association held an emergency meeting. The email said it was about community security concerns, but I knew better. It was about me. I walked into the community clubhouse, a sterile room that smelled of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. All eyes were on me. I saw pity in some, fear in others, but mostly I saw the smug satisfaction of people who were glad it wasn't them. Karen was at the head of the table, looking regal. She called the meeting to order and launched into a speech about the importance of rules and the sanctity of property values. She never mentioned my name, but her eyes kept flicking in my direction. When she finally opened the floor for discussion, I stood up. I held up the list of fines. I'd like to talk about these, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I went through them one by one, calmly, logically. When I got to the oil stain, I said, "This stain appeared on my driveway last night. It feels less like a violation and more like vandalism." A murmur went through the crowd. For a second, I thought I had them. Then Karen smiled her serene, condescending smile. "Mark, are you accusing your neighbors? The board simply documents violations as they are reported. If you have a problem with the fine, you can file a formal appeal. The procedure is clearly outlined in the bylaws, Section C, Paragraph 4. It was a perfect bureaucratic checkmate. She knew the appeal process was a nightmare designed to make you give up. Then, a woman from the back of the room, one of Karen's closest friends, piped up. "He's always been difficult. What about that fence he put up 2 years ago? It took months to get him to paint it the right color." The tide turned, instantly. The room filled with a chorus of agreement. "He thinks the rules don't apply to him. My cousin had a neighbor like that, ruined the whole street." It was a public execution. I was no longer a neighbor. I was a problem, a threat to their precious property values. What would you do in that situation? Stand there and take it or walk out? It's a tough call when you're surrounded. I saw one person who wasn't joining the chorus. Old man Frank. He was a retired surveyor who'd lived in the neighborhood since it was just dirt roads and dreams. He was leaning back in his chair, watching the whole circus with a look of profound disappointment. He caught my eye and gave a subtle shake of his head, a silent warning. "Don't engage. You'll lose." I sat down, my face burning. The rest of the meeting was a blur. Karen proposed a new initiative, a community watch and beautification patrol, a volunteer group to walk the neighborhood and, as she put it, proactively identify potential compliance issues. It was a secret police force, her own little army of spies, and I knew who their first and only target would be. The meeting ended. I felt like I'd just gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight and lost every single one. As I walked out into the cool night air, Frank fell into step beside me. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, you listened. "You're fighting the wrong battle, son," he said, his voice raspy. "What battle should I be fighting, Frank?" I asked, the exhaustion hitting me like a physical blow. He stopped and looked at me, his eyes sharp and clear in the dim light of the parking lot. He gestured back toward my house, barely visible through the trees. "She's not looking at your house," he said, and his words sent a chill down my spine. "She's looking through it." He paused, letting the words sink in. "That woman doesn't care about your mailbox, Mark. She's after something else entirely." "She's after something else entirely." Frank's words stayed with me, rattling around in my head long after he'd disappeared into the dark. What could she possibly want? My house was just a house, solid, built by my father's own hands, but nothing special. It sat on a standard suburban lot, same as everyone else's. What was there to be after? The next day I got my answer, or at least the next phase of the attack. I was in my kitchen when I saw them, the beautification patrol. It was two of Karen's lieutenants, Brenda and Patty, walking with the self-important gait of mall cops. They moved slowly down the sidewalk, their phones held up like weapons. They stopped right in front of my house. I watched from my window as they took pictures. Of my lawn, which I'd mowed to a perfect 3 inches that morning. Of my fence, which was now the HOA-approved shade of taupe. Of my front door. It was a slow, deliberate inspection, designed to be seen. It was an act of intimidation, pure and simple. A few hours later, my phone began to vibrate on the kitchen counter. It didn't just buzz once. It kept going, a relentless, angry tremor. I picked it up. It was the neighborhood online forum, a place I usually avoided like the plague. A new photo album had been posted by Karen. Title, Community Compliance Review. It was a gallery of my home, shot from every unflattering angle imaginable. The comments were already flooding in. Look at the state of that place. It's dragging down all our property values. I heard he threatened Karen at the meeting. It was a digital feeding frenzy. Each notification was another bite, another piece of my reputation being torn away. I felt my world shrinking, the walls of my own home closing in. I finally silenced my phone and tossed it onto the couch. The buzzing stopped, but the feeling remained, a phantom vibration under my skin. The real poison seeped in the next morning. I had a call with a potential client, a big one, a developer planning a new golf course community. The contract was worth at least $10,000, money I desperately needed with these fines piling up. The man on the other end of the line, a Mr. Davies, sounded cool. "Mark," he said, his voice smooth and corporate. "I was doing a little local due diligence before our call, and, well, I came across your neighborhood's online forum. Seems to be a lot of chatter about property maintenance issues at your address." My stomach dropped. I tried to explain. I told him it was a dispute with the Homeowners Association, a personal vendetta, but I could hear the click of his mental checklist. Unreliable, creates conflict, bad for business. "I see," he said, the 2 words a death sentence for the deal. "Well, we're looking for partners with a proven track record of seamless community integration. We'll be in touch." He never called back. 2 potential clients gone in a week. This was more than just public shaming. This was a financial siege. They weren't just trying to make me move. They were trying to make it impossible for me to stay. That afternoon, I sat on my back porch, the silence of my phone now more unnerving than the buzzing had been. I stared out at the woods, my mind replaying Frank's words. She's looking through it. I thought about Karen's weird, fleeting glance. It wasn't at my house. It was at the empty plot next to it, the community land, the patch with those old, majestic pines, the land that supposedly belonged to all of us. An idea started to form, a long shot. My entire job was about reading the history of a piece of land to predict its future. Maybe I'd been trying to read the wrong chapter. The story wasn't in Karen's bylaws or the venomous comments online. The real story was older, deeper. It was written in faded ink on dusty maps, filed away in a place Karen couldn't control. I stood up, a new kind of resolve hardening in my gut. They wanted to fight me with their flimsy, made-up rules? Fine. I'd fight them with facts. With history. I walked back inside, grabbed my keys from the hook by the door, and for the first time in days, I felt something other than anger or despair. I felt a flicker of purpose. The county records office was a 20-minute drive. The county records office was exactly as you'd imagine it, a cavern of beige filing cabinets and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights. The air tasted of dust and decaying paper. It was a place where stories went to sleep. I was hoping to wake one up. I started with the basics, the original plot maps of the subdivision from the late 70s, when it was carved out of farmland. It was tedious work, unrolling heavy sheets of paper that cracked at the edges and trying to make sense of the faded blue lines. After an hour of getting nowhere, I was about ready to give up. Finding something interesting, a voice asked from behind me. I turned. It was a young woman, maybe early 20s, with bright, curious eyes and a pencil tucked behind her ear. She was wearing a county staff polo shirt. "Just chasing a ghost, I think," I said, rubbing my tired eyes. "Sometimes the ghosts are in the details," she said with a smile. "What are you looking for?" I explained the situation, keeping it simple. I told her I was just curious about the history of the common land next to my property. I left out the part about Karen and the fines. She introduced herself as Emily, a cartography student doing an internship. Her face lit up when I mentioned the land. It turned out she loved this stuff. She was a map geek. The official subdivision plots are one thing, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But the real secrets are in the geological surveys, the ones they did before the developers even broke ground. Nobody ever looks at those. She led me to a different section of the archive, a bank of long, flat drawers I hadn't even noticed. She pulled one open with a low groan of metal on metal. Inside were maps that looked even older, drawn by hand with an artist's precision. Emily ran her finger over the index. Here we are, section 42B, Pre-Development Topographical Survey, 1974. She helped me spread the huge map out on a light table. It buzzed to life, illuminating the land as it had been 50 years ago. And there it was. It wasn't a ghost, it was a river, or, more accurately, the ghost of a river. A faint, meandering blue line snaked its way right through the middle of our pristine, manicured neighborhood. The legend called it Hickory Creek Intermittent, an old, mostly dry stream bed that would swell and flood during heavy rains. My heart started to pound. Emily pointed to the map. See this contour? The creek ran right under where your house is, and right through that common plot you mentioned. I leaned in closer. On the final development plans, I said, my mind racing, that creek doesn't exist. Exactly, Emily nodded, her eyes wide with the thrill of discovery. They must have filled it in, buried it. But you can't just erase a waterway. Not really. The ground underneath is still different. It's softer, more saturated, unstable. We looked at each other. According to modern building codes, putting a structure over an old stream bed like that would require deep pilings, expensive soil stabilization, a whole slew of engineering hoops to jump through. It would add hundreds of thousands of dollars to any construction project. What would happen, I asked, if someone tried to build on that common land, not knowing this was underneath? Emily's smile vanished. It would be a disaster, she said simply. The foundation would settle, crack. In a heavy rain, the whole area could liquefy. It would be a lawsuit waiting to happen, a catastrophe. I had it, the something else Frank was talking about. This wasn't about my mailbox. This was about that empty plot of land with the beautiful old pine trees. Karen wasn't just looking through my house. She was looking at the multi-million-dollar blank canvas right behind it. But that canvas had a fatal flaw, a secret written in faded ink that only Emily and I now knew. I felt a surge of adrenaline, of triumph. I had her. All I had to do was present this map at the next board meeting. It was irrefutable proof. Her plan, whatever it was, would be dead in the water. I thanked Emily profusely. She made a copy of the old survey map for me. As I walked out of the records office and into the bright afternoon sun, I felt like I had the world on a string. I had the truth. I had the one thing that could stop her. I was so sure I had won. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly have known, was that Karen was about to change the game in a way I never saw coming. The truth I was about to learn is only as powerful as the people willing to listen to it. And the news that hit the neighborhood the next morning made sure that nobody would be listening to me. The news spread through the neighborhood like a lit fuse. It started with a frantic email from the Homeowners Association board, subject line, urgent, theft and vandalism. I read it standing in my kitchen, the morning sun streaming in, feeling a cold dread crawl up my spine. Sometime during the night, the clubhouse had been broken into. The safe in the main office, the one containing all the community's operating funds, had been expertly cracked. The email was vague on the exact amount, but rumors put it somewhere north of $15,000. But that wasn't the worst part. According to the email, the thieves had also stolen the original property deeds for the common lands, including the plot with the pine trees. My mind instantly went to the map in my briefcase. The motive. This was it. Someone wanted those deeds to sell the land, and they knew the originals were the only things that truly mattered. Then came the knock on my door. It wasn't a tentative tap. It was a hard official rap of knuckles on wood. I opened it to find Karen, but this wasn't the smug, triumphant Karen from the other day. Her face was a mask of practiced distress. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was twisting a handkerchief in her hands. It was a masterful performance. "Mark," she said, her voice trembling just enough. "Oh, Mark, it's terrible." Behind her, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, drawn by the drama. They were watching us, their faces a mixture of concern and morbid curiosity. "I heard," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I got the email." "Your cameras," she blurted out, her voice rising in desperation. "The ones on your house. They would have faced the clubhouse. They must have recorded something. The police have no leads. Please, Mark, I'm begging you. We need that footage." The words hung in the air, the beautiful, terrible irony of it all. She had come to beg for the very thing she had so gleefully destroyed. Have you ever been in a position where you hold all the cards, but playing them feels like losing? It's a strange, hollow victory. I just stared at her. I let the silence stretch out, let the neighbors lean in a little closer. I saw the hope in their eyes. They were looking at me, the neighborhood pariah, as their last hope. "You took them down, Karen," I said, my voice flat. "You had your workers cut the wires just 3 days ago, remember? Aesthetic harmony." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Karen's face crumpled, but not with guilt, with rage. She turned the situation on me with the speed and lethality of a striking snake. "You see," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me, "you see what his stubbornness has cost us. If he had just followed the rules, if he hadn't been so difficult, we would have the criminals on tape. This is his fault. He might as well have been their accomplice." It was brilliant. Diabolical, but brilliant. In one move, she had absolved herself of all blame and painted me as the villain. The crowd's faces hardened. The hope vanished, replaced by suspicion and anger. I was no longer the last hope. I was the reason they had no hope at all. She had turned my small victory into a catastrophic defeat. The crowd started murmuring, their voices low and angry. I was cornered. I thought about the map, the proof I had tucked away. But what good was it now? Who would believe me? The man who, in their eyes, had just enabled the robbery of the entire community. Presenting a 50-year-old map now would sound like the desperate ravings of a guilty man trying to change the subject. I had been played, utterly and completely. She hadn't just won the battle, she'd rewritten the whole war, and I was on the losing side. I closed the door on their accusing faces, the sound of their angry chatter muffled but not gone. I leaned against the door, my heart hammering in my chest. I felt a wave of defeat so profound it almost buckled my knees. That was the moment I almost gave up. I thought about putting the house on the market, taking the loss and just leaving, escaping this suburban prison and the woman who ruled it. The fight was gone. She had won. But then my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, just 3 words. It read, "They use drills." And attached was a single grainy photo, taken in the dark. It was a close-up of a patch of churned-up dirt, right near the base of one of those old pine trees on the common land. "They use drills." 3 simple words, but they hit me like a jolt of electricity. I stared at the photo. It was blurry, probably taken in haste, but it was clear enough. The disturbed soil, the small, perfectly round holes in the ground. They were core samples. This wasn't the work of common thieves. This was geological reconnaissance disguised as a break-in. I knew who sent it. It had to be the young worker, the one who wouldn't meet my eye when they cut my cameras down. He'd seen something. His conscience, or maybe just his fear, had gotten the better of him. He was a pawn in Karen's game, but he had just handed me a queen. My despair evaporated, replaced by cold, sharp anger. This was it. The missing piece. The robbery was a smokescreen, a brilliantly executed piece of theater to get the neighbors to agree to sell the land. Karen's plan was to get a developer, probably a friend or, worse, family, to buy that common plot for pennies on the dollar. She'd play the hero, recovering the community's lost funds. The developer would build luxury townhouses, and they'd both walk away with millions. They were hiding the existence of the underground stream bed, and these core samples were their way of double-checking the soil stability before they finalized their plans. But now I had proof. It wasn't just an old map anymore. It was fresh evidence. The problem was, I was still the neighborhood villain. I couldn't just walk into a community meeting and shout, "J'accuse." They'd laugh me out of the room. I needed more than evidence. I needed a stage. I needed a moment so undeniable it would shatter Karen's carefully constructed narrative. Let me back up a step. As a landscape auditor, one of my main tools is a ground-penetrating radar. It's a beast of a machine, looks like a souped-up lawnmower, and it lets me see what's happening beneath the surface without digging a single hole. It's expensive to rent, but I knew a guy who owed me a favor. I made the call. That night, under the cover of darkness, I met Emily from the records office. I'd called her and explained everything. The thrill in her voice was palpable. This wasn't just about maps anymore. This was real. We wheeled the GPR unit to the edge of the common land, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. If I'm right, I whispered, the machine humming to life, we should see a clear anomaly, a channel of saturated, unstable soil, right where the old map says Hickory Creek used to be. We started the scan, moving in a slow grid pattern across the plot. The screen of the connected laptop glowed in the dark, painting a picture of the earth beneath our feet. And there it was, a wide, dark ribbon snaking its way across the property, a subterranean ghost. The radar data was unequivocal. The ground was a swamp just a few feet down. Building anything here without millions in remediation would be suicidal. We saved the scans, concrete digital proof, to back up the old paper map. Just as we were packing up, the worker texted me again. She's calling a vote at the Founders Day picnic tomorrow to sell the land. Of course. The timing was perfect. A public gathering full of food and good cheer. People would be distracted, eager to put the unfortunate robbery behind them. She'd frame the land sale as the only way to save the community from bankruptcy. They'd vote yes without a second thought. I looked at Emily, the grim reality setting in. We had the evidence, but we were out of time. The Founders Day picnic was less than 24 hours away. It was my only shot. I had to turn their biggest party into my public courtroom. I have an idea, I said, a wild, desperate plan forming in my mind. It's crazy, it's theatrical, and it's probably going to get me arrested. Emily just smiled in the darkness. I've got the maps, she said. You bring the crazy. The plan wasn't just to present evidence. Anyone can argue with a chart on a screen. I had to give them something they could see, something they could feel, something that would turn their pleasant picnic into a live demonstration of the truth. I needed to make the ghost of Hickory Creek rise from its grave, right in front of their eyes. I spent the rest of the night making preparations. I felt like a general planning a final, desperate assault. I didn't sleep. The image of Karen's smug face, her false tears, her absolute certainty that she had won. It fueled me. Tomorrow wasn't just about saving a piece of land. It was about reclaiming my name. It was about showing these people that the truth, no matter how deep you bury it, always finds its way to the surface, especially when you add water. The Founders Day picnic was in full swing. The smell of grilled hot dogs and freshly cut grass filled the air. Kids were running around, music was playing from a cheap speaker, and the whole neighborhood was milling about on the great lawn. At the center of it all, on a small makeshift stage, was Karen. She was in her element, the benevolent queen surveying her happy subjects. She tapped the microphone, and the music died down. Friends, neighbors, she began, her voice filled with somber gravity. As you know, our community has suffered a terrible blow, but we are resilient, and I have found a solution. She held up a sheaf of papers. I have here an offer from a reputable developer to purchase the unused common plot, the one with the old pines. The offer is generous, more than enough to cover our losses and secure our financial future. A ripple of relief went through the crowd. It was the easy answer they'd been hoping for. She was serving them salvation on a silver platter. All we need, she concluded, her voice ringing with false triumph, is a simple majority vote. All in favor? Hands started to go up all around me. This was it, my one and only chance. Not so fast, Karen, I called out. My voice cut through the cheerful atmosphere like a blade. Every head turned to face me. I was standing near the edge of the common plot, next to something covered by a tarp. Emily was beside me, holding a rolled-up map. Karen's eyes narrowed. Mark, this is not the time or the place for your personal grievances. This isn't personal, I said, walking towards the stage. This is about public safety. I pulled the tarp off my secret weapon. It was a 50-gallon drum filled with water, connected to a high-pressure pump and a long fire hose. The crowd murmured, confused. Karen tells you this land is stable, I announced, my voice booming. She tells you it's ready to be built on. I say she's lying. I unrolled the copy of the old geological map and held it up. This map from 1974 shows a stream bed running right under our feet, a waterway Karen and her developer friend conveniently forgot to mention. She scoffed, "An old map? That's your proof? This is absurd." "The map is the history," I said. "This," I gestured to the pump, "is the demonstration." I turned to the crowd. Have you ever been told a lie so big you start to doubt your own eyes? Sometimes you just have to see it for yourself. Before Karen could stop me, I nodded to Emily, who was holding a small vial. She uncapped it and poured a fluorescent green dye into the drum of water. I fired up the pump. It roared to life. I pointed the hose not at the stage, but at a small, innocuous-looking storm drain at the edge of the plot. I blasted the green water down the drain. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The crowd was silent, watching. Karen had a smirk on her face. "See," she began, "nothing but—" She never finished her sentence. A few yards away, near the base of the stage where she was standing, a patch of grass began to darken. Then, a thin trickle of bright, unholy green water seeped up from the ground. Then, another. And another. Within a minute, a vivid green puddle was forming, spreading, turning the perfect green lawn into a toxic-looking swamp. The ghost of Hickory Creek was visible for all to see. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. They weren't looking at a chart or a map. They were looking at the physical proof of Karen's lie, bubbling up from the earth right at her feet. "This land isn't just unstable," I shouted over the hum of the pump. "It's a swamp. Your developer buddy knew it. That's why he was taking secret soil samples in the middle of the night. The robbery? A charade to get you to sell this worthless, dangerous land before the fall rains revealed the truth for them. They weren't stealing from us. They were trying to sell us out." The crowd turned on Karen. Her face, which had been a mask of confidence, was now pale with shock and fury. The developer's representative, a man in a slick suit standing near the back, quietly slipped away. The game was over. In the chaos that followed, Karen's little empire crumbled. The developer pulled his offer. An investigation was launched. The board was dissolved. It was a total, complete victory. A few weeks later, a special town meeting was held. They offered me the position of president of the new Homeowners Association board. They wanted me to be the new king. I thought about it for a second. The power, the vindication. And then I looked at their faces, the same faces that had been so quick to condemn me. I politely declined. Instead, I nominated Frank, the old surveyor, to head up an independent oversight committee. They needed a guardian, not a ruler. My final act was a quiet one. The day before I put my house up for sale, I walked over to the common plot. The grass was still stained a faint green in patches. I took my father's old brass plumb bob from my pocket. It felt cool and heavy in my hand. I found the sturdiest branch on the largest pine tree and tied it there, letting it hang free. It spun slowly, finding its perfect, true vertical. A symbol that balance had been restored. I sold the house a month later. I lost my home, the one my father built. But I walked away with something more valuable, my integrity, and the knowledge that sometimes the only way to win a crooked game is to wash it all away and show everyone the truth that lies just beneath the surface. What I did for my community, and I'd do it again. If you've been in a similar fight, let me know your story in the comments. We're all in this together.